on his phone. He goes, "Hey, how's it going?" He goes, have you checked the headlines?" Wait, what? So anyway, I got all this done before I got stressed.
I figured if it hadn't happened already without me knowing, it would happen eventually.
Wow, it's gonna help you.
Yeah, it does. There's some little thing in the rice.
It just shows you.
Maybe it's like a pepper.
Chili.
Yeah. That one you eat it.
You guys are good. Are you distanced enough?
Yep.
I think somebody you should move over a little bit. I don't want to be the one that like appears, like have your photo up here. And they're like, Karen didn't.
Get outed.
Yeah, I don't want to get outed.
It looks like they're a mile away.
They do look like they're a mile away.
Really?
Okay.
Ooh, yum.
How's the food, guys?
I haven't tried it. The salad looks like roots because it has the onion.
Yeah, it's got kale in it.
That's very healthy.
All right, so are we live now? Oh! We're live, baby! All right.
Just started.
Okay, just started. I'll try not to shout at the mic. Oh, now there's yard work. Can you hear okay?
Yes, I think we're good.
Okay, well, as long as you have...
Move back there.
Oh, you know what? She's saying, do you guys want to move back there?
Oh, so then your voice.
Then you could, yeah. That's a good idea. All right. Yes.
Sunburn.
You're going to get sunburned? Good. Wow. Vitamin D, babe. So, yeah, so we're here in the noisy yard of the Bonhoeffer House, and we're in two groups, so that we've got a group, I'm just saying for Facebook Live people, we're observing the guidelines in a group of 5 and a group of 2. And really glad you're here, and I hope that leaf blower stops soon. But my standard for success is if lunch was here and you enjoyed it, then it's a win. Everything else is extra. So here we are. Well, we're going to take 2 minutes in silence to eat. You can eat prayerfully if you wish, to just enjoy the sunshine and the beautiful breeze, and to be aware of God's presence here within us and among us. So let's pray. I'm going to ring the bell. Amen. So we're continuing our considerations of this quality of resilience, the quality of, facing hardship, facing uncertainty, and remaining flexible, remaining alive, and seeing opportunity for growth and for development. We've been using the book from Rushworth and Kidder about resilience. So I've been starting these conversations with kind of touching on some of their findings, because they did studies of prisoners of war and people who had endured all kinds of physical and emotional and psychological trauma. And they identify these resilient people. And so they ask the question, what is it? What was the key to their resilience? And so each week we're looking at different factors. We talked last week about facing our fear. We've talked about the quality of hope, the posture of hope. And today we're talking about having moral courage and acting for others, for altruism, as a source of development of resilience, this quality. So we're gonna tell the story of Francis and Clare of Assisi, which I'm really excited about. But before we do that, just a couple words about this idea of moral courage and the qualities of altruism and how they help us develop resilience. Studies find that thinking about your own personal values, your ethics, your beliefs, that actually thinking about it and affirming your ethics, that is shown to diminish your perceptions of threat. It's demonstrated to reduce your responses of defensiveness in the face of threat. We see that it also helps moderate your rumination on failure, basically regret. That cycle where you fret over the things you've done. That having a strong ethic has all kinds of wonderful benefits to you yourself. They talk about 3 strategies for developing ethics or moral courage. They say, first of all, do a candid self-assessment. Take the time to ask yourself, what do I really believe? What are my core values, my beliefs? And then ask, do I have the courage to actually live by them? Am I motivated to live more deeply into those beliefs? They encourage you to talk to a highly principled person. So, as we're talking today, think about someone that who you think of as being like having an amazing sort of foundation of belief, whether that's religious or not, but someone who really lives by what they believe. And talk to them, sort of find out more about what they believe, and that just might that example and that role model might help you kind of take some steps towards living in that way. They also say practice, even if you don't fully live into your beliefs and values, which I don't think any of us really does that, but practice it. The power of practice. Aristotle says this: we become just by doing just acts. We become temperate by doing temperate acts. And we become brave by doing brave acts. So, fake it till you make it, maybe. If it's something you believe in, just try it out. Have the courage to try it, even imperfectly. And then they go on to talk about altruism, how important that is. And they define altruism, as acting with a social interest, and even acting in mutual cooperation. They say that mutual cooperation increases self-confidence and a deeper perception of meaning in your life. In brain studies, the release of dopamine and oxytocin, which are hormones associated with trust, caregiving, social bonding, all these create this helper's high. When you act with sort of radical altruism, your brain actually gives you this rush of positive reinforcement. And again, I'm no brain scientist. I'll continue to disclaim that. But I think the point is our bodies, our spirits are made for living in community, of living for others, of caring for other people. And our bodies respond positively when we act in that way. And of course, Jesus has pointed the way in these verses from Mark and then from John. Jesus says, someone asks, which is the most important of all the commandments? And Jesus said, the first in importance is, listen, Israel, the Lord your God is one. So love the Lord your God with all your passion and prayer and intelligence and energy. And here is the second commandment. Love others as well as you love yourself. There is no other commandment that ranks with these. And from John, I've told you these things for a purpose, that my joy might be your joy, and that your joy wholly mature. This is my command. Love one another the way I loved you. This is the very best way to love. Put your life on the line for your friends. You are my friends when you do the things that I command you. So let's just pause for a minute and consider this question. Moral courage and altruism, how could those be linked with the quality of resilience? How might those be linked in your mind?
I think it takes courage to do what is right now.
Mm-hmm.
Do the right thing for others, even if you don't feel as personally affected.
Mm-hmm.
And to be resilient without it. Right now, it kind of feels like hit after hit of things that we're not supposed to do.
Yeah.
So it takes resiliency and your moral courage to continue to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm. It does take moral courage to do the right thing, just every day. Like we were just negotiating that right now, right? With gathering in this way, it takes courage to do the right thing every day. It's hard.
I also think that just doing, loving your fellow human beings, it does get you in touch with who you were created to be. And I think deep down there's that sense that we were, there's something missing from us. And so, when we engage in acts that love other people, we're getting closer to the people that the Lord intended us to be. And I also think it just brings us closer to the Lord himself, which creates resilience, because that's the only thing that really provides hope in the face of despair. In the face of so much injustice and cruelty, it's easy to turn inward and become self-centered, or to just shut down. And so I think when you're facing outward and you're doing it with this foundation in the Lord, you're building that deep foundation of identity and purpose. I think it just breeds hope in general.
Yeah.
Change.
I love that vision of an outward-facing posture and how that builds in us our identity and our hope. Yeah. You thinking anything else?
I think it also distracts you from your internal struggles.
Distracts you from your internal struggles? Uh-huh.
I think of advice my mom always tells her kids, and that is when we are complaining or when we have a really hard time, she says, okay, I hear you, but now if you're having a hard time, someone else is probably having a hard time too, so why don't you focus your attention on helping the other person, and that'll distract you from the season you're in.
I love that. Yeah. Sort of takes you out of yourself and your own complaints towards somebody else. Well, let's continue to think about these things and look for them in the story that we're going to read. So what I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about the story of Francis and Clare, and then we'll turn to the readings. One is a story about Francis, and the other is a letter from Clare to a woman named Agnes of Prague. So Francis and Clare were born in Assisi in the 12th century. Francis was born in 1181. So it's pretty crazy to think about what their life must have been like. But everybody has heard of Francis, right? At least we have an image of him. When you think of Francis, what do you think of? Nature. Mm-hmm. Bunnies, rabbits, the sun. Yeah. Any other perceptions of, or what do you know about him?
At our church, we have St. Francis Day, and everyone brings their pets to church.
Yes. Sunday is St. Francis Day, in fact. I didn't realize that, but it must have been planted in my mind because at St. Paul's on their virtual service, they're going to do a blessing of the pets virtually, and Ginger fights other dogs, so finally she can participate in the blessing because she could never go in person. Yeah, so there's this idea of nature and of pets and of peace. You think of this little statue, say St. Francis in the garden, but he had a lot of surprising qualities, and that's what I would like us to think about today. He was born in Assisi in Italy. He was a natural-born leader. He was called the King of the Youth because he would run with his gang, sort of fraternity in Assisi of the young boys, and they would go out in the night and he would sing bad songs in French, all the ballads, and they called him Frenchie. That was his nickname. But he always paid for their outings. He picked up the tab, so he was very much beloved by his buddies in Assisi. His parents, they were named Pietro and Pica, were wealthy cloth merchants, so they were people of privilege in Assisi. And they expected Francis, of course, to follow them in the business. And really all that meant for him was learning a little bit of math and, getting ready to take his place at the helm. So he was having a great time in Assisi. And then something changed. Perugia, the town across the valley, declared a war against Assisi. So there was a battle. And he ran out on his horse, I imagine him galloping with all of his friends to fight off those terrible Perusians. But he was captured in the battle, and he was taken back and put in a prison. And he was in this prison for a year. And, you can imagine what a 12th century prison would be. I think it definitely included rats. But at last his father got him out, probably with the help of some money. And Francis, when he came out of jail from being a prisoner of war, he was a changed person. And everything that we know about this period really looks like PTSD. I mean, he was traumatized. He didn't want to party with his friends. He was very reclusive. And in his despair, he turned to religion. He turned to the spiritual life. And he walked to Rome. He did a pilgrimage, which wasn't unusual in those days, but it's like more than 100 miles. He took his clothes off and traded them with a beggar and took the beggar's rags and put them on. He gave away his traveling money and sat down and began begging for alms. So even for a pilgrim, this was considered pretty unhinged. He walked back to Assisi, to home, and just ended up kind of wandering out in the woods. And even his parents wondered, what had become of their darling, fun Frenchie. Now, a very important moment in his life happened when he was out in the woods. It was very hot. And one afternoon he walked into a chapel, this sort of abandoned chapel. And it was cool in there and it was dark. And in that moment, the figure of Christ on the crucifix spoke to him. And what he heard were these words: "Francis, rebuild my house, which you can see is falling down." Which surprised him, as you can imagine. But in that moment, he got right to work on repairs. And he threw himself into this project, collecting stones to fix the church and camping out nearby or sleeping on the floor of the chapel. And to support the cause, because of course this was a church, he felt completely justified by God in taking some cloth from his father and mother's shop and selling it for the money to buy supplies. Well, his father did not appreciate this at all. So there was a big struggle between Francis and his father, which we will hear about later. But Francis, to him, it was like just taking what belonged to God. And it came to a head when Pietro called him out. And so in public, in the piazza in Italy, in Assisi, Francis confronted his father, took off all of his clothes, literally. There was a priest nearby who had a cloak, so the story goes, and wrapped him. But he literally took all his clothes off, gave them to his father, and said, "You are not my father. My father is God, and I am now free to follow Jesus." And that was it. He left and went into the countryside, a free man, literally. This was, of course, took some moral courage. He decided in this process that he was going to follow Christ. And his whole ethic, his way of being, his principle was to do what Jesus did, to imitate Christ. And we've heard this idea of what would Jesus do? But he literally lived by this principle. He had a few kind of key verses. One from Luke 9, Jesus said, "Take nothing for the journey, neither bread nor money, and do not have a spare tunic." So Francis thought about it and said, "Okay, I will not own any clothes but the ones on my back." And he was known for giving away his cloak. So if someone would give him a new cloak, he would give it to the next person who asked for it. He read in Matthew 8, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." So he slept under the stars or on the floor of the chapel, and officially moved out from his parents' house. He thought about the words in Matthew where Jesus says, "Do not worry about tomorrow." So he wouldn't touch money, and he went so far on this idea of not worrying about money or not worrying about tomorrow that he wouldn't soak beans overnight, because that's how you cook them usually, at least in the old school way, you soak them. But he's like, that's worrying too much, because if you're already worrying about what you're going to eat tomorrow, but that's not allowed. Just wake up tomorrow and God will take care of you. Don't worry about it. So he had his own logic. And of course he had been really, as we know, really injured and traumatized by his experience in battle. But he was really healed in a particular incident in which he was out in the countryside and he saw a person with leprosy, which is a horrible disease and contagious, I'm sure. And he had always been really freaked out by leprosy. That was one of his particular phobias. But in this moment, he stopped and he embraced this guy with leprosy. He put his arms around him and cared for him. And from then on, cared for people with leprosy. And this was like ultimate altruism, because he was risking his very life. Of course, we think about the caregivers, medical caregivers right now. You know, Christy and Joey, both of you are in this camp of, you're still in nursing school, right? Like you are, this is altruism at its best in medicine. But his view was he was embracing Christ. He was taking care of Jesus Christ in the person of this leper. And so through his kind of radical new philosophy of embracing Jesus and what he would do through his altruism with healing, he himself was healed. And we read about how he became, again, this joyful person that he had been as a kid. Because he was free, living out in the countryside. And other people, other young men from Assisi started leaving home to go live with Francis. Because he was having a lot more fun camping in the woods. And of course, this did not go over well with the town, but this is what happened. A number of young men came out and lived with Francis. They called themselves the Jugglers of God because they were having a wonderful time. And they would preach the gospel, and they would sing songs, and they would heal people, and they were just living this life of minstrels and storytellers and preachers. And Francis would preach outside because, of course, he wasn't allowed into any respectable church. And this young woman named Clare heard him preach. And she was already kind of showing signs of being a troublemaker because she refused to marry the man that her parents had picked for her, which is not cool when you're 14 or whatever age she was. Yeah, but anyway, so that was the first start. But Clare got this sight of Francis, so she decided she would do the same. Like, she wanted to live this life following Jesus. So one night, she snuck out of the house, as none of you have ever done, I'm sure, but ran to the woods, found Francis in the woods with the boys, and declared herself, she said, "I want to follow Jesus with you." And Francis cut her hair. This was an act at the time of religious commitment and devotion. And when her uncles came the next morning and they tracked her down, it was too late. She was ruined. She was committed. This was her life. And just in closing on the story, she could not live in the woods with the boys. This was still too much for the medieval culture. And probably for your moms and dads too right now, right? Genevieve? No. So she had to live in the convent. She became a nun, and other women came, just as the men had gone to live with Frances, women came and lived with her to form this community of healers and contemplatives behind the walls of the convent. And even a sister of hers and her aunt came and became a part of this convent. So we had these little communities around Frances, and they're now, of course, the Franciscan brothers who are still current around the world, and the poor Clares who are still nuns in communities today. And each one of them in their own way followed Jesus with utter commitment. And I think it's really fascinating that we have these two examples together, because they were not married, and from all we know they were not romantically inclined, but they were like counterparts, where Frances was out in the world, healing and preaching, very action oriented, and Clare was in this quiet space of contemplation and prayer and healing and kind of constraint. And I love that, because I think we're all in these different places. Some of us are called to be out in the world, and some of us are isolated or in quarantine, that we have all these different ways. They show us how to follow Jesus wherever we are. And the two of them lived this way to the end of their lives. And what I think is one little part of the story is, they were so extreme in their beliefs about poverty and freedom that even their own brothers and sisters in these communities kind of got tired of it and started trying to kind of institutionalize or kind of tame this lifestyle. And so some of the brothers began, got a little tired of sleeping on the ground. And there's a story of a donor who built a house for them, because this person loved what they were doing. They were serving and they were caring, and so built them this little house or big house, I don't know. And they were all for it, that they had received this gift and to live in it. And Francis would have none of it, because he was following this, the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. So he jumps up on the house and was like pulling off the tiles and throwing them down. He's like, no. Jesus did not live in a house. So this poor guy, even in his own band of brothers, was misunderstood. But I just think it's a interesting part of the tale that even the true believers struggled with how to follow Jesus. Like, what did it really mean in these days, right? So that is the tale. Thus endeth the tale of Francis and Clare. Now, a lot of stories were written about Francis, so we're going to read one, and we're going to pause as we go and sort of look at this and think about it together. This is a very famous story, and you'll hear some of the elements that you've already learned. But here we go. There came a moment when the Holy Spirit overtook the young Francis. The time had come for him to follow the impulses of his soul. He would turn to things of the Spirit, putting aside worldly concerns that had dominated his life. He sold everything he had, even the horse he was riding. When he was still wondering what to do with the money he had received from the sales, he came upon the old crumbling church of St. Damien and its poor old pastor. This is where he'd seen the crucifix. At the old man's knees, he poured out his newly found spiritual hunger. The old man was skeptical of such a sudden conversion in a young man so well known till now as the neighborhood's ringleader in riotous living. He refused the money, but Francis remained obstinate, begging the old man to believe in his sincerity, asking the priest over and over again that for the sake of the Lord he be allowed to stay at the church with him. Finally, the priest gave in. Francis could stay, but out of fear of the young man's father, the priest would not accept the money. Francis then took the money, for which he had no longer use or desire, and he threw it upon a windowsill to join the dust that had gathered there. For Francis, the money was of no more importance than the dust. Henceforth, he would desire to possess only that wisdom that is better than gold, and to acquire that prudence which is more precious than silver. So in this next passage, we're going to see how this went over. And there's one hint, it involves a pit. Okay, here we go. Francis's father refused to honor the call that Francis had heard in his soul. And he went in angry search of his son, determined to return him to his former life. For a month, Francis hid in a pit, dependent on others for food and every human need. He prayed and wept and begged his Lord to deliver him. In the past, Francis had trusted his own efforts. Now he cast his whole care upon the Lord, and in the darkness of the prison, he began to experience an exquisite joy, the likes of which he had never known before. He felt his soul catch fire, and he left his prison to face those who were pursuing him. His old friends refused to accept his new life, and they greeted him with abuse. They shouted at him that he was mad and demented. They threw mud and stones. He became the talk of the town. But a patient man is stronger than a proud man. Francis turned a deaf ear to their anger and hatred. He remained unchanged and unbroken by their anger and hatred. He gave thanks to God. It is useless to persecute someone who is truly striving after virtue. The more they attacked, the more surely they will triumph. It's the more they are attacked, the more they are surely to triumph. To be humbled, it is said, strengthens a generous spirit. Let's just take a pause here. We've talked about moral courage and altruism and resilience. What do you see so far in this story that looks like any of those things to you? Courage or resilience or altruism?
I think the fact that he goes back to his old friends,
Mm-hmm.
because if that was me, I'd be fine moving on with my new life, but I wouldn't want to go face the people
Mm.
who now would see me as so different. And I think that takes a lot of courage to go back to them and knowing that they will most likely, which they did,
Yeah.
sort of not understand and make fun of him and even just ridicule
Yeah.
him.
He goes back to his old friends.
Yeah, it'd be one thing to just start over somewhere new, but to go
Right.
back to the people that knew you would be very hard.
Yeah. Yeah, the courage to face those old friends.
Yeah.
Yeah, they threw.
His
Yeah.
father.
And his father.
I mean, and even the fact that the priest wouldn't take his money shows that his father was a very powerful, dominating.
Yeah, that is notable, isn't it? The priest knew better. He's like, I'm not going to take that money. What else do you notice in this story? Does anything catch your ear or your eye? Any phrases or words?
I think the phrase turning a deaf ear to anger and hatred.
Turning a deaf ear to anger and hatred.
I feel like it's a phrase that I struggle with a little bit.
You struggle with it?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Because I get not trying to elicit anymore, but it feels, especially in today's days and times, to just turn a deaf ear just feels wrong. You need to push back a little bit and say try to reform as opposed to just letting that sit. But I guess in his context, he was just kind of not, I don't know, validated by not responding.
Yeah.
It's a weird balance of you don't want to validate what they're saying, but you also don't want to betray your own values and sort of where and which side is the moral courage truly placed.
Yeah.
Is the hard part.
Right. So is moral courage confronting them and sort of having it out and pushing back, or is it just turning out like, I can't hear you? Right? Is it this? It's a good question. Right. There's a lot of complexity, I think, in all of this. I noticed he felt his soul catch fire. He's in the prison and he experiences this exquisite joy, and he felt his soul catch fire, and he left the prison to face those who were pursuing him. I think that's really cool.
There's that feeling of fire or passion when you feel the Lord's presence.
Yeah.
And it's not something that I just want to keep and sit with. It definitely is a moving.
The passion of the Lord's presence moves you.
I at least want to tell someone.
Right. You want to tell someone. Yeah. So that sounds familiar to you, that feeling. Yeah. Well, let's continue. One day, during Mass, the Gospel spoke to Francis in a special way. Disciples of Christ, he heard the Gospel say, should not possess gold or silver or money. As they go on their way, they should not carry scrip or wallet or bread or staff. They should not have shoes or 2 tunics. They should go, preach the kingdom of God, and do penance. His response was immediate and joyful. This is meant for me. This is what I have longed to hear. This is how with all my heart, I wish to live. He began immediately to live out the word of the gospel. He took off his shoes, abandoned his staff, kept only 1 tunic, and replaced his leather belt with 1 small cord. To keep the world's temptations at a distance, he designed for himself a simple tunic that resembled a cross. He made it of especially rough material that he might do penance. He made it so simple and meager that no one could be envious. The world might flee and abhor poverty, but he knew that it was treasured by the Son of God. Poverty became his spouse, the love of his life. He loved her beauty. He abandoned his father and his mother that he might hold her, poverty, more closely. He surrendered everything else that they might be as one. Not for even an hour was he unfaithful to her, to poverty. This, he told his followers, was the way to perfection, the guarantee of eternal riches. No one desired gold as he desired poverty. No one guarded their riches as he guarded this jewel of the gospel. Nothing upset him more than to see in his companions, anything that was contrary to poverty. From the beginning of his religious life until he died, his riches consisted of only a tunic, a cord, drawers, and nothing else. I guess drawers would be like underwear? I'm not sure. Anyway, the poverty of his habit proclaimed where his riches were. In this way, he went through life, happy, secure, and confident. He traded the treasures of the world for 100-fold reward. So, what are you thinking about this story and about this person and his choices?
There are days I wish I could just go be a hermit.
You'd like to be a hermit some days? Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Why?
Life's so complicated.
Life is so complicated. It's not complicated for Francis, is it?
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just I was reading a book about like the 1920s and like it seemed there were things that were really bad. Obviously, the Great Depression was awful.
Yeah, the Depression, stuff like that.
Simple. Like
Yeah.
it was, you like worked and you went to school.
So like roaring 20s, that was totally
Yeah.
Yeah. It was simpler. Yeah.
amongst them.
Yeah.
Like generally, there weren't as many
Yeah.
like concerns
Mhm.
like that seem like social media and internet. And, like there are just some things that really complicate
Right.
the way we live. And so like there are times when like it'd be nice to like just go live in the woods.
It would be nice to live in the woods, right? And social media, life is so complicated. So And especially if you're looking at it as a spiritual choice, like not only just like, I just need a break. So what keeps you from living in the woods, Joey?
Desire for human connection.
Desire for human connection. That's valid. Okay, well he had his brother, so you could convince some people. What else would keep you? I mean, I'm sort of joking, but I'm serious too. Like, let's just say from a point of view of your convictions, like your own particular beliefs, what keeps you from making that choice to live in the woods?
I think the idea that I would feel like I was walking away from people that needed me and needed the work that I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
That was
God's called you to something different.
God's called you to something different, right? You'd be walking away from your medical work and the people. Yeah. What else are you thinking about this? What questions is it bringing up for you?
I kind of am thinking about what someone who has lived in poverty or does live in poverty, what they would say
Yeah.
to the story. So I think for me, like, I think it's really easy for me, especially in like religious settings, to kind of romanticize selling all my possessions and just like living with the Lord. But that's also because I have never felt like hunger pain before. I've never felt like homelessness. Like that has never been an experience I've had. And so I think like his tolerance for that is so unique and so niche, and I just wonder if there are people who are living like that right now in poverty, or what people would say to someone like him who chooses that.
Right. For people who don't have the choice, who live in poverty, what does it look like to kind of hold it up as a virtue?
I think it's
that's
like
a great
for
question.
someone like me, kind of easy for me to say, it's like almost envy that simplicity.
Envy the
It's also kind
simplicity.
of envy.
An ignorant envy of what poverty really means to people around the world. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I was thinking about that too, and now it's both and. I'm like, wow, I can't imagine actually living in this and having no choice. But at the same time, like there is something that in us that like should desire that kind of simplicity, and I wonder. I think all the time about how like in like where I live and grew up, and like the church where I lived and grew up, just with so much affluence, like how we have just like I've been raised to idolize comfort.
You've been raised to idolize comfort.
Yeah, and to idolize security and ambition and all of these things. And it isn't bad to, I think the Lord says He'll provide for us because He doesn't want us to starve. Like the point of dependency on Him isn't that, but I just like wonder, sometimes like I'm always thankful for where I grew up, and so I don't want to say that I'm not, and I recognize that I've grown up with so much privilege to always have like a hot meal and a roof over my head, that I do wonder the spiritual damage that is done to us that grow up with so much, because we don't know how to suffer, and we just that dependency on the Lord, that idolizing of like comfort and not knowing how to suffer, I do think it keeps us sometimes from really pursuing after the Lord in this way.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of the people I've met with the strongest faith I've ever seen have been people who know how to suffer and who know how to go without.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
Yeah.
it's interesting.
I think too that we all know how to suffer. I think it's hard to go through life without suffering and without really feeling that deeply. Whereas, I mean, some people do feel it more than others, and in some ways more acutely than others. But I don't know. I think that we all suffer in different ways. And then also, I wonder if you ever felt the tendency to make poverty an idol.
Did he make poverty an idol? Yeah.
Denying of yourself, or making that an idol. And I think a lot of times we actually do that today, whether that's in time spent on yourself, or
Right. The self-denial that feels virtuous. And I'm really glad you brought that up, because I was thinking about that story where they're given this house and he's like throwing the tiles off the roof. I mean, what about the donor? Like, maybe he had the option to have, to me, my take on it is like, have a little humility, or kindness for your brothers. Like, they're just tired of living, sleeping on roots. So it's just really interesting. It raised so many questions.
It raises a lot of questions for me too, because there's the commandment, love your mother and your father, honor your mother and your father.
On your mother and father.
And he's just completely dismissing them and leaving them.
Yeah. You left them in their business. Yeah.
And I just, like, when he's destroying this donor's gift, even if he chooses not to sleep there, couldn't he give that to someone else? Like, one of the people that he's trying to heal. It just seems like he's so blinded by this desire to be poor because he thinks that'll make him close to God, that he's not being considerate of actually doing God's will.
Yeah.
I think it's easier to set your sights on, if I am poor, then I will be close to God, and like lose yourself in that rather than actually making yourself close to God.
Yeah. It does kind of goes back to this questions about, like, what is it about poverty in Francis? Kind of tease that out. Is it a good, virtuous corrective to his like idolizing comfort and wealth that he was brought up with, or is it an idol that distracts him and keeps him from God? Well, we're kind of closing on our time, and I just feel like this story of Francis and Clare, it's just another model, another brother and sister from the faith, people who, they did their best to follow Jesus where they were as they could. They definitely showed moral courage, if not like insane obstinacy, but that they give us hopefully some encouragement and some new questions to look at our own lives. And I think, like you said, Aaron, to think about poverty, maybe this story of Francis and Clare is more of a story for us, as people who have comfort and wealth. And this is not the mentor or the example for someone, a single mother with children she's got to feed and provide for. So, this is just another story of more strugglers in the faith. So, well, I'm going to sort of close us with a prayer from Clare, some words from St. Clare, and encourage you to take the reading with you, because there's a cool letter from Clare. It's actually her words, and this is such an old manuscript that it's amazing that we have anything of hers at all. But she wrote it to this wealthy bohemian aristocratic noblewoman who had given up she could have married the illustrious emperor, it says in the letter, but she gave up her shot at a dream marriage to join these poor Clare sisters who became a nun. So she talks about her, praising her for her choice, to enter into this life of community, and she asks Agnes to pray for her. And I think that points to, for me, the need for community. That when we make these choices to live on the edge, or to live in obedience to what we believe is the gospel and Christ, is that we need each other too. So there's just that little thread there that I want you to notice. Okay, so I'm going to read the words from Clare, and they're embellished just a bit. I think a few translations have softened them, but that's okay. And that's how we'll end our time. I'll read it to you. It is no longer I that live, but Christ that lives in me. I am secure in the Lord. I can look out now through the Lord's eyes. I can see the world as He created it, in His mercy. I can see my brothers and sisters with His love. And I can worship the Father through the eyes of the Son in the love of the Holy Spirit. Let love enfold us, O Lord. I come, O Lord, unto your sanctuary to see the life and food of my soul. as I hope in you, O Lord. Inspire me with that confidence which brings me to your holy mountain. Permit me, divine Jesus, to come closer to you, that my whole soul may do homage to the greatness of your majesty, that my heart, with its tenderest affections, may acknowledge your infinite love, that my memory may dwell on the admirable mysteries here renewed every day, and that the sacrifice of my whole being may accompany you. Let love enfold us, O Lord. And so what you hold, may you always hold. What you do, may you always do and never abandon. But with swift pace, light step, unswerving feet, so that even your steps stir up no dust, may you go forward securely, joyfully, and swiftly on the path of prudent happiness. Let love enfold us, O Lord. So may the peace of Christ go with you wherever he may send you. May he guide you through the wilderness and protect you through the storm. May he bring you home rejoicing at the wonders he has shown you. May he bring you home rejoicing once again into our doors. Amen. Peace. Thanks for coming and sitting in the sun. And if you want to stay, stay.
Oh, I wish.
There's always room in the sunshine here.
I have a meeting at 2:30, so I have to
Go, go, go.
I know, I have a few
Right.
shots.
How do I turn it off? Bye, everybody.
One more by chance.
Yes, please do.